Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava Metzia. We are up to Perik Chet Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai V'Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Chana bad Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam beGan Eden Amen and Le'avdi ben Chaim Lechaim v'Derefua Shel Emav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa B'Tor Shach Olei Israel and Achlama Mera Benjamin Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. This Mishnah discusses another dispute between a buyer and a seller. If a person sells his olive trees to someone to cut down and use for firewood. Now this is permitted in the case of olive trees that produce little fruit. Normally it is forbidden to cut down a fruit tree, as says in Dvarim, chapter 20, verse 19. However, if a tree produces so little fruit that it is not worth doing the work needed to keep it alive, one may cut it down. This is discussed in Bava 91b and in Shvi, chapter 4, Mishnah 10. So again, if a person sells his olive trees to someone to cut down and use for firewood, but the buyer did not cut them down right away and left them growing in the seller's land, in the meantime, the trees produced olives of such low quality that when they are pressed, they will yield less than a quarter log of oil for every seah of olives. Log and seah volume measurements, a seah contains 24 log. These olives produce so little oil that after earning back the money spent to harvest and press 24 log of them, he is left with not even a quarter log of oil as profit. A quarter log is also known as a revi'it. The law is that these olives belong to the new owner of the olive trees. The owner of the land could also have a claim on them since they grew from his land. However, since they produce so little oil, we assume that he waives whatever claim he might have to them. However, if the trees produced olives that yield a quarter log or more of oil for every seah of olives, and both people claim the olives, this one says, the owner of the trees says, my olive trees grew these olives, so they belong to me. Right, my olive trees grew these olives, they belong to me. And the owner of the land says, my land grew these olives, so they belong to me. They divide the olives between them since they are both right. The olives need both the trees and the land in order to grow. Unlike the previous Mishnah, they do not divide them out of doubt. Each one has a right to the olives because the olives grew from both the tree and from the land. Now the Mishnah speaks of a case where the owner of the land did not say when the tree should be cut down. However, if he said they should be cut down immediately, then any olives that grow afterwards belong to the owner of the land, as the Rav writes based on the Gemara on page 100b in Masechet Bava Metzia. Now, in the previous case, the trees grew in the owner's land and were then sold. In the Mishnah's next case, the trees grew in one place and ended up being in someone else's land. Shataf nar zetav, if a flooding river swept away someone's olive trees, untanam letoch sedeh chaveron, deposited them in his neighbor's field, where they took root and grew olives. Although the owner of the trees has no right to leave them in his field, the owner of the field allowed them to stay. And the owner of the tree says, my olive trees grew these olives, so they belong to me. And the owner of the land says, my land grew these olives, so they belong to me. They divide the olives between them for the first 3 years. After that, all the fruit belongs to the owner of the land. The owner of the trees really should have no right to any of the fruit, because the owner of the land can say to him that if the trees had not come into his field, he would have planted his own trees in their place and all the fruit for himself. Therefore, he is not benefiting from the trees that were swept into his field. However, the Mishnah teaches that the owner of the trees does have a right to share the fruit of the first 3 years during which the trees are in his neighbor's land. And the reason for this is as follows. The Torah states that for the first 3 years after a tree is planted, its fruit is forbidden as orla. This is in Vayikra, chapter 19, verse 23. Had the owner of the land planted his own trees, their fruit would have been forbidden to be eaten for 3 years. The reason he gets to eat the fruit now is only because these grown trees were brought by the flood into his land and started growing in it. So during the first 3 years, the owner of the field must divide the olives with the owner of the trees. After that, the owner of the land keeps all future olives for himself, as the Rav writes based on the Gemara on page 101a in Bava Metzia. However, he must pay the owner of the trees the value of the trees. Now the commentators explain that actually, when a tree is uprooted and replanted, it too is subject to the law of Orla, and its fruit cannot be eaten for 3 years. In the Mishnah's case, however, the trees were uprooted together with a large clod of soil surrounding them. Since this soil was enough to keep them alive, when they take root again in another field, they are not subject to Orla. And that is end of Mishnah Hey. The rest of this chapter deals with the laws of renting a house. We continue with Mishnah Vav. Hamaskir bait lechavero, if someone rents a house to another person without specifying how long the lease will last, for example, they agreed how much money will pay each month, but they did not say how long he can stay. The owner cannot force him to leave in the winter, literally the days of rain in Eretz Yisrael. It rains only during the winter months, from shortly after Sukkot until Pesach. So the owner cannot force him to leave in the winter from the Sukkot holiday until Pesach, because almost all available houses are rented during that period, and it is difficult to find a new place to live. And if he wishes to have him leave during the winter, he must tell him during the summer, at least 30 days before the start of winter season, before the rain comes, when houses are still available for rent. And this is what the Rav explains based on the Gemara, page 101b, and Metzia. Now, literally, he must tell him by the 15th of Elul, 30 days before Sukkot. By the same token, if he wants the tenant to leave during the summer, he must tell him 30 days in advance. By right, when a lease agreement does not specify for how long the rental is, the owner should be allowed to force the tenant to leave at any time. The rabbis, however, decree that he cannot do so unless he gives the tenant enough time to find another place to live. So in the summer, when houses are available for rent, he must give him 30 days notice. And in the winter, when it is difficult to find a house to rent, he cannot force a tenant out at all unless he notified him 30 days before winter began. However, if the lease specified when the rental would end, the tenant can be forced to leave even in the winter, since he knew in advance that the rental would end at that time. Just as the owner must give the tenant time to find another place to live, so too the tenant must give the owner enough time to find another person to rent his house. So if the tenant wants to leave during the summer, he must tell the owner 30 days ahead of time, and if he wants to leave during the winter, he must inform the owner 30 days before winter starts, since very few people are looking for a house in the winter. Now, the Mishnah is going to list the law for towns. That is the law for towns, what the Mishnah just listed. Ubakrachim, however, in the big cities, where many people want to live in, it is always difficult to find houses to rent. Whether he wants his tenant to leave in the summer or in the winter, he must tell him 12 months in advance. Now the rules for stores is somewhat different. In the cases of stores that are being rented, whether they are in towns or in big cities, the owner must tell the renter 12 months in advance that he wishes for him to leave. This is because storekeepers often sell on credit, and if they are forced to leave on short notice, the customers who owe them money will not know where to find them and will not pay the storekeepers what they owe. The owner must therefore give the storekeepers 12 months notice to give them time to collect their debts. If he sells on credit during those 12 months, he can tell the buyer where he will be moving so that he can find them later. Similarly, if the storekeeper wants to leave, he must tell the owner 12 months in advance, because any storekeeper who takes over this store will also want to wait 12 months at his old location before moving into this store. The owner therefore needs time to have another renter in place. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Chanut shel nachtomim shel tzabaim, if it is a store used by bread sellers or fabric dyers, people would make their own wool, linen, or cotton fabrics and then take them to a dyer to have them dyed a certain color. Shalosh shanim, he must let the renters know 3 years in advance, because such businesses sometimes allow buyers to wait a very long time before paying their bills. Therefore, they need to stay in place for 3 years to be able to collect what is owed them. And the Rav tells us, Valacha ke Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the Halacha follows the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. That is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.